The current economic situation is indeed not very good. In April, it rose by 0.1% year-on-year and decreased by 0.1% month-on-month. PPI fell by 3.6% year-on-year and decreased by 0.5% month-on-month. The real estate market also quickly stalled after the short Xiaoyang Chun in February and March. Although the social zero data looks very impressive, it has increased 7.4% year-on-year, but considering that Shanghai was closed due to the epidemic in April last year, this year-on-year increase does not reflect the real situation. The data of 7.78% decrease from the previous month in March is more illustrative. The youth unemployment rate exceeded 20%, which is a record high. In short, the data is not good looking. This is also consistent with everyone's subjective feelings. Of course, it's normal for this to happen. After all, it is now a global economic recession, and the United States is also in a cycle of raising interest rates, with interest rates as high as 5%. In this environment, it seems reasonable that the economy is sluggish even compared with most overseas countries. Our situation is still relatively okay. But that's no reason to live with it. The reason is simple. Unlike most countries, we have policy reserves benefiting from the maintenance of strategic determination. We have a large room for decline in both interest rates and deposit reserve ratios. The previous financial demolition, in addition, the 3 trillion foreign exchange reserves and the continuous record high trade surplus, in short, all kinds of factors determine that we have enough cards to play in the face of economic downturn. This is almost unique in the world. Since there is a card to hedge against the economic recession, and now the economic recession is coming as scheduled, why not play it? In fact, it's not that they haven't played, but they are playing some small and trivial cards, which are mending and mending. The real big moves, such as comprehensive interest rate cuts and RRR cuts, seem to be very cautious or even stingy. What? In fact, it is because the time is not ripe. To be more specific, the situation of the game between China and the United States does not allow it. Sino-US relations have reached the point where there is basically no room for a handshake and peace. The price gap between the two sides is too large, and the bottom line is too far away. At the same time, neither side has the absolute strength to suppress the other. It is a means to force the other party to make concessions. In this case, it is basically impossible to achieve a strategic compromise. So what to do? Can only continue to stretch. Stretch until there is an obvious trade-off in strength, that is, one of the parties suddenly declines in strength, or the other suddenly rises in strength, causing the current balance to be broken. Position and build a new strategic balance. How to achieve the obvious ebb and flow of strength? For the United States, what it hopes is to harvest the world, especially China, by raising interest rates and shrinking its balance sheet, so as to fill up its huge financial hole and regain its vitality. Credit collapsed, and then took advantage of the economic expansion to take over the global economic share and market space left over from the decline of US hegemony. Judging from the current situation, although the strategic situation is still, the United States is still on the defensive, but in terms of strategic situation, it is beneficial to China. It's over, several medium-sized banks have exploded, and the continuation of the high interest rate environment will trigger more thunderstorms in the future. Moreover, the US federal debt has reached its peak again. Even if Congress reaches an agreement to raise the debt ceiling, the problem is that in the current economic situation and interest rate environment, who will buy the issued debt is a big problem. Now the world knows that US debt is basically buy less and sell more. And if everyone doesn't buy it, then the Fed can only print money to pay for it. But the Fed is raising interest rates and shrinking its balance sheet to suppress inflation and harvest the world. If you print money to buy bonds all the time, you will be releasing water again, which means that all previous efforts will be wasted and the interest rate hike cycle will fail. This will trigger an epic collapse of US dollar credit. This is a situation that is in China's interest. Since China and the United States cannot reach a compromise, it is best for the US economy to collapse before itself. As long as it collapses first, we will not only have less positive pressure, but also greatly increase the room for global economic expansion. But here is a problem: although the situation in the United States is not good, when it will collapse, no one can say for sure. The only certainty is that the United States will definitely find ways to delay. After all, it is a global economic recession, and the United States has raised interest rates and shrunk its balance sheet. In this environment, not only the United States is suffering, but all countries are also suffering. As long as the United States procrastinates and lets other countries take the lead, they can buy their high-quality assets at the bottom. Explode one and cut one by one. The more you cut, the more holes you will fill, and the longer you will have the confidence to drag on. If the cut is in place in the end and the hole is filled up, there will be no thunderstorms, and the tribulation will be successful. How should China respond to this situation? Of course, as the weaker party in the Sino-US game, China will certainly not take the initiative to intensify conflicts and accelerate American thunderstorms, but China will not sit back and watch the US plan succeed. So what China has to do is to support those key emerging countries with both internal and external means, de-dollarization through local currency swaps, and lend them dollars to them with their rich foreign exchange reserves and surplus, so that they can repay the debts of the United States and avoid the thunderstorm was harvested by the United States. Internally, it was to stabilize the situation and avoid passively giving the United States the wind. It is easy to understand externally. In reality, we also do the same, and the results are good. The US interest rate has been raised for a year, and the interest rate has already exceeded 5%. This is enough, but there are not many thunderstorms in overseas countries. The reason for this is that, to put it bluntly, they are backed by China. If they can't do it, they will go to China for help. Anyway, China has a lot of redundant dollars. As long as this country is valuable and understands current affairs, China is very willing to lend them dollars to tide them over. Internally, the so-called passive lending to the United States is a little more complicated. For the United States, the current high interest rate of 5 points and the environment of continuous shrinking of the balance sheet are actually very uncomfortable for him, and there are also huge risks in it. So the United States actually wants to cut interest rates and release water. The reason why they want to release it but dare not release it is internally because inflation is too high, and externally because there are not enough countries with thunderstorms correspondingly, not enough high-quality assets for it to harvest. In this case, if China starts to rescue the market right now, a policy of cutting interest rates and reserve ratios to stimulate the economy, although it can indeed reverse its own economic decline in the short term, the consequences will be very serious. On the one hand, given the influence of China's economy and its status as the world's factory, the current economic stimulus will lead to an increase in production, which in turn will drive down the prices of industrial products and help the United States slow down internal inflation. The more the inflation crisis is eased, the more stable the crisis of the US economy will be, and the possibility of a soft landing will be greater. Even if the US still procrastinates not to lower interest rates in order to harvest externally, initially raising interest rates to suppress inflation is just an excuse, or just one of the purposes. The pressure faced by the internal economic self-destruct will be less. This will be very troublesome. Although we also expect the United States to end the cycle of interest rate hikes as soon as possible, if this end is based on the fact that China and the United States do not reach a compromise, then a hard landing is more beneficial to China than a soft landing. A hard landing means that the US economy will be hit hard, and the dollar credit has been severely damaged, and American hegemony has been severely damaged. In the future, China's overseas interest space and global economic influence will increase significantly. And if it is a soft landing, it means that the US economy is still stable, the global economic dominance is still solid, and the strategic containment of China still has enough strength to support it. On the other hand, even with this little support from China, it is still not enough to help the United States survive the catastrophe. In the end, the United States still exploded. But after it explodes, the global economy will be dragged down immediately. At this time, it depends on China's ability. If China's policy reserves are sufficient, then the firepower will be fully activated and the policy will be released in sufficient quantities. Then internally, it can hedge the impact of the US crash on the Chinese economy and help us quickly reverse the decline. Externally, the rapid recovery of the Chinese economy will create a large amount of demand. Not only Chinese companies can undertake this demand from China, but overseas companies can also undertake it. Under the circumstances of all beings at a loss, the acceptance of China's demand can be said to be the life-saving straw for countries around the world to get rid of the impact of the US economic collapse and get out of the quagmire of economic crisis. As for who this external undertaking is for, in addition to the basic competitiveness of its own products and services, it actually depends to a large extent on who has a good relationship with China, who is more aware of current affairs, and who can bring more strategic benefits to China. To put it bluntly, the policy reserve for bailing out the market is China's bargaining chip to expand its global influence, expand its global strategic interests, and gain global economic dominance. The more policies that can be released at that time, the faster and higher the economic rebound will be, the more attractive China will be to countries around the world, and the more strategic benefits will be exchanged for. And if these policy reserves are released in advance, and there are no cards to play when the United States collapses, or there are not enough cards, let alone seduce the world and compete for global economic dominance, if it can't be done, it will be brought into the ditch by the chain reaction triggered by the collapse of the United States. This is the logic behind the government's insistence on gritting its teeth and not bailing out the market even though the economic situation is not good. Rescuing the market now will definitely be effective in the short term, but in the medium and long term, it will actually be harmful. Of course, the premise of not bailing out the market is that the domestic economy can still sustain it. If it can't hold on, and the United States collapses before it collapses, it will be a joke. So we can see that although there is no overall major market rescue policy, small policies such as sewing and mending, such as allowing stalls, lowering deposit interest rates, and relaxing some restrictive measures in the property market, have been continuously introduced. Are these policies working? According to the general cognition of ordinary people, it is definitely useless after all, the economy is still sluggish, repeated or even negative. But in fact, if we understand the logic of the government, we understand that the government did not expect to make a comeback with these small repairs. To put it bluntly, the purpose of introducing these minor repair policies is just to support the market. It is enough to let the economy survive and the common people have something to eat. As for the big move, now it is impossible to make it out. When will it be out? There are two situations: either the United States is soft, accepts our conditions, completely abandons the suppression of China and partially abandons global hegemony. This condition is very harsh for the United States, or the US economy collapses. All in all, it is advisable to keep an eye on the long term. The game is always difficult, and victory is never achieved overnight. Fortunately, we have the upper hand right now. The US is worse off than we are. Therefore, there is no major policy to rescue the market now, but it is actually a good thing, proving that the wind direction is still in our favor, and the advantage lies in me. If the US softens or draws out all its policy reserves before the collapse, it will be a huge bad thing. This means that we can no longer hold for the US, so even if we know that we will save the market first, there will be endless troubles, but given that we will not save it immediately crash, that can only choose the lesser of two evils. Let's get through the present disaster first. As for the future, I can't care about it. This is the macro aspect. On a macro level, the same logic applies to real estate. Now the controversy about real estate is very fierce, and whether to save the market is also a mess of noise. So, is real estate, the de facto pillar of the Chinese economy, still in play? On this topic, Mr. Yunqi's point of view is very clear. The real estate market will definitely come to the rescue, and the so-called bull market will still have another wave. However, this wave of bull market is different from the past. It belongs to only 10% of the real estate. As for 90%, even if the big bailout reappears, it will not be able to fundamentally restore the decline. Why do you say that? Pay attention to the WeChat public account, Yunqi. Mr. Yunqi will continue to interpret for you in the next. The CG diagram of the Type 076 amphibious assault ship drawn by netizens based on related papers has caused heated discussions on the internet. If the new two-ship island layout is true, it will make the Type 076 amphibious assault ship with the largest deck area in the world. The pure drone carrying mode also makes 076 unique. There are various indications that 076 is likely to be an epoch-making ship, and China is expected to become the leader of the times. Recently, news about the Type 076 amphibious assault ship has once again become the focus of discussion among many netizens. However, unlike the Fujian ship, which usually becomes the focus of discussion because of the exposure of aerial photos, the reason why 076 will become the focus this time is not because its related photos were exposed, but because of a CG imagination drawn by a netizen. Comparison between the Type 076 amphibious assault ship and the American class. In this CG picture, the Type 076 amphibious assault ship changed the single ship island design in the previous series of imagination pictures, and adopted a double ship island layout similar to the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. At the same time, The flight deck of the new 076 still uses the same straight-through deck as the traditional amphibious assault ship, rather than the inclined deck design drawn in some imaginary pictures. The elevator also adopts the inboard layout commonly used on amphibious assault ships, rather than the outboard layout similar to aircraft carriers. Of course, there are still some old design elements retained in the CG picture of 076, that is, the electromagnetic catapult on the bow. It can be seen that the fact that the Type 076 amphibious assault ship will use electromagnetic catapults has become the consensus of many netizens. A close-up image of the double ship island of the 076 amphibious assault ship. So here comes the question, why does the CG picture arouse heated discussions among netizens? The reason is also very simple, because the basis of the CG picture is related papers, so it has certain feasibility. At the same time, the 076 presented on this basis has an overall design closer to an amphibious assault ship than a light aircraft carrier. Many viewers may wonder, isn't this 076 an amphibious assault ship? Shouldn't something like an amphibious assault ship be normal? This is mainly because in many viewpoints, the target of the Type 076 amphibious assault ship should be the U.S. Navy's America-class amphibious assault ship. At the moment when the U.S. Navy has successfully verified the feasibility of carrying F-35B fighter jets on the first two ships of the American class, the USS America and the USS Tripoli. Therefore, there is a view that the Type 076 amphibious assault ship must have a similar fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft capability in order to reach the level of the American class in terms of performance. USS America amphibious assault ship equipped with F-35B. Therefore, when relevant bidding documents on the internet revealed that the Type 076 amphibious assault ship was equipped with an electromagnetic catapult, some people subjectively believed that the main purpose of the Type 076 edition of an electromagnetic catapult was to carry fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft. Considering that there is no news that China is developing a vertical takeoff and landing fighter of the same type as the F-35B. So in theory, the fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft that the 076 can carry can only be the J-15 already in service and the J-35 under development. In the end, in the imagination of many people, 076 has gradually changed from an amphibious assault ship to a light aircraft carrier that uses electromagnetic catapults and angled decks and carries J-15B fighter jets. And because the CG picture is not like the 076 that netizens imagined before, it has triggered a series of discussions on the internet about the design direction of 076. Light aircraft carrier version 076 drawn by netizens. At this time, someone must want to ask, which CG picture is closer to the real Type 076 amphibious assault ship? Judging from the information that has been released so far, the latest one is undoubtedly closer to the real 076. Because it meets the PLA's tactical needs for 076 and that electromagnetic catapult. In 1977, the reason why the PLA will continue to propose the construction of an amphibious assault ship with an electromagnetic catapult when it already has the 075 amphibious assault ship. The reason is indeed, as many netizens think, it is to eject fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft. But what netizens didn't expect was that what the People's Liberation Army wanted to eject from the 076 was not a manned carrier-based aircraft, but an unmanned carrier-based aircraft. Imagination of 076 equipped with unmanned carrier-based aircraft. Because judging from the 075 stock construction time of only 10 months, the docking period of the 076 amphibious assault ship is longer than that of the 075, and it is relatively short compared with the aircraft carrier that takes several years. Allow the People's Liberation Army to quickly pull up a 076 fleet in a short period of time. However, it is useless to have a boat alone. Someone needs to sail the boat. And a ship like Xiang 076 that needs to cooperate with the carrier-based aircraft force to play its role requires not only the crew to drive the ship, but also the pilot to drive the carrier-based aircraft. But the problem is that the training speed of fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft pilots cannot keep up with the construction speed of 076. Once the People's Liberation Army starts to build 076 on a large scale, it will inevitably face a huge talent vacancy in the future. New carrier-based aircraft pilots trained by the Naval Aviation University. And this is why 076 needs to be equipped with carrier-based drones. After all, now that automated and intelligent systems have spread and become popular, it is no longer science fiction to let drones rely on AI to independently complete a series of primary combat tasks and complete advanced combat tasks in human-in-loop mode. This will greatly reduce the need for carrier-based aircraft pilots on the 076 amphibious assault ship, allowing these pilots to take off and soar on a real aircraft carrier. At the same time, since the carrier aircraft has become a drone with a smaller tonnage and size, many carrier-based aircraft support equipment on the 076 amphibious assault ship can also be simpler. For example, the angled deck that many netizens once imagined is not needed, and the UAV can completely land on the direct deck with the arresting cable for a short distance. Outboard lifts designed to accommodate larger carrier aircraft can also be replaced with safer and less costly inboard lifts. Imagination map of light aircraft carrier version 076 amphibious assault ship. The island space left by the double ship island design can be used to park carrier-based aircraft like the Queen Elizabeth, and can also be used to park support vehicles. After all, UAVs have no driver coordination, and rely more on the assistance of support vehicles in deck scheduling. As for the Type 076 amphibious assault ship, which roughly adopts a traditional hull configuration and has electromagnetic catapults and unmanned carrier-based aircraft, can it compete with the American class in terms of performance? I don't think this is a problem either. After all, the purpose of the ship is to complete the design indicators and established tasks, not for single-handed fighting beast chess. As long as 076 can complete the tasks assigned to it by the People's Liberation Army, then it is a good ship. Recently, US President Biden stated at the G7 summit that Sino-US relations will ease. Then on the day he made his statement, China announced that Micron's products sold in China had not passed the cybersecurity review, and domestic key information infrastructure operators should stop purchasing Micron's products. Micron's failure to pass the security review meant that the American chip company's sales in China were directly cut off. Micron's main products are NAND memory chips and solid-state drives. Micron has always had a criminal record in promoting the US government's sanctions against China's semiconductors. It was impossible before, but now it can show that there are domestic alternatives. Some time ago, the price of solid-state drives was cut in half, and we knew that domestic production had already come out, and the Chinese storage industry no longer needed Micron. Regarding China's decision, Micron did not complain. After all, things like eating and smashing bowls will overturn sooner or later, which also shows that China has solid evidence. If the matter becomes serious and China releases the details of the review, other markets of Micron will definitely be affected, so Micron still adopts a calm attitude. However, the US government was obviously not used to China's action at the beginning. The US side stated that it resolutely opposed restrictive measures without factual basis. What is more interesting is that Matthew Miller, the new spokesperson of the US State Department, was asked this question in his first show. He still followed the script to talk about open markets and transparent regulatory mechanisms. Reversely, the United States can ban Chinese companies, why not allow China to do the same? China can also have security concerns. Why can the United States and China not? Miller was even more speechless. The American double standard is so blatant. But without factual basis, this is what the United States did. The United States used the so-called national security issue to list more than 1,200 Chinese companies and individuals. How many times has it presented evidence? China censored Micron and the United States sanctioned it. Many Chinese companies are fundamentally different. McCall, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, reacted even more aggressively, arguing that China's legal system is like a mafia and criticizing China for bullying American companies. It is quite rare for the United States to accuse other countries of bullying. In the international community, bullying is used to it. Of course, it would be unbearable when the position is reversed. It can only be said that the United States is so aggressive, and it is still not used to being counterattacked by its opponents. It is worth noting that when the results of the Micron review came out, the CEO of NVIDIA also quickly expressed his appeal that the Biden administration would cancel the export control of semiconductors to China. There is only one Chinese market in the world, which cannot be replaced. South Korea also asked the United States to relax its restrictions on the expansion of chip production in China, which really had the effect of killing chickens and monkeys. After overreacting at the beginning, the US government came back to its senses and began to reason. Recently, White House National Security Council Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby also responded to this matter, but he said that China's position is very tough, but the White House is communicating directly with China, and it is expected that this incident will not undermine the White House's efforts to restore Sino-US relations. And efforts made. He also continued to emphasize that he will continue to promote U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, Treasury Secretary Yellen, and Commerce Secretary Raimondo to visit China. To put it simply, this matter is nothing, and it will not affect the overall situation of Sino-US contact and dialogue. See, as long as the United States is hit hard, the Americans will speak the truth, this time in a language they understand. The U.S. imperialists are very arrogant. Wherever they can be unreasonable, they must be unreasonable. If they try to be reasonable, they will be forced to do so. The United States is so eager to engage with China, which shows that its domestic problems are imminent. At this time, it should be more rhythmic with the United States.